Morning. My name is Guido Ivetta, and this talk is called Fundamental Questions of Ethics. We developed this together with Luciana Benotti and used material from Yulia Svetskov. My presentation will be a bit shorter than 20 minutes, so maybe we can make some time there. Luciana won't be able to participate in order to keep the schedule. First, we're going to explore 3 cases. For each one, we'll ask key ethical questions. I mean, this talk is called Fundamental Questions of Ethics. The title, a better title could be A Few Fundamental Questions of Ethics. These are not definitely not all of them, but we have a few questions for each case. I'd love to hear your thoughts on each case and on the questions themselves in the end. So the first case is called the chicken dilemma. So imagine we can gather some data from an egg, so maybe a photo, its weight, its temperature, and using these variables, we could train a neural network to predict whether the egg will hatch into a rooster or a hen. And in the case it's a rooster, it goes directly to the slaughterhouse, and if it's a hen, it's taken to the farm to lay eggs, right? And the question rises, right? Is this classifier ethical? This is not clear, right? These slides will not give answers to this type of questions. We can ask them, we can guide through the answers, but we'll have to learn how to reason about the technology and its impacts on people. So in today's society, meat consumption is generally accepted, and such a classifier could make farming more efficient, right? But it's not obvious to me that eating meat will still be acceptable or even legal in the future. These are gray areas without clear answers, and they evolve over time along our values and beliefs. And actually bringing this topic of legality, it's definitely clear that what's illegal or illegal and being ethical and unethical have nothing to do with each other. They are not the same thing. And this is, this example carries over to our second example with humans, right? The second case is about IQ prediction. So IQ is a number meant to represent a person's relative intelligence. So we can imagine a new classifier that gathers a large amount of personal data, like our facial structure, our social media posts, right? And trains a neural network to predict someone's IQ. I mean, it's very similar to the previous case, but now dealing with humans, and it feels different. Technically, this might sound plausible. I mean, the technology might be able to do that, but ethically, let's ask a few questions, a few fundamental questions, as the title says. The first question could be, who benefits from such a model? I might say that HR departments might use it to hire the, quote, best candidate. University could use it to admit only the top students, right? These are all in quotes. These are all in quotes because you can imagine, even if the classifier could be 100% accurate, it could still cause harm, right? So maybe what if the user of this classifier optimizes it or uses it for the wrong thing or for the misguided thing? So, for example, maybe this HR department will be hiring based solely on IQ, and it could ignore teamwork, social skills, or the actual technical knowledge that it will be actually needed for the job. And that's without even questioning the concept of IQ itself, if it makes sense. And that was the best case scenario. And we know that real life classifiers always make mistakes. And what happens if this real life classifier makes a mistake? Let's say a classifier got 90% accuracy. Is that good enough? What number is good enough? And we know that mixed classification is expensive because it affects people's lives, like people's ability to get a job. And furthermore, are there any minority groups for which the accuracy is lower? Let's say that white females have 90% accuracy, but people with blonde hair under the age of 25 have only 60% accuracy. Should the system be used? And in a more technical aspect, maybe test data probably doesn't include enough white females under the age of 25 with blonde hair. So all of these different permutations and combinations of factors that actually affect the solution, should that be reported, right? These 3 questions, the who benefits, who can be harmed, and is there a vulnerable population involved, are really interesting. And those are the main fundamental questions that I'm giving you here in these slides. What's clear is that we need to be aware of real-world impact of our research and understand the relationship between ideas and consequences. The last example is called the AI Gator. This was a real project in 2017. It used tens of thousands of photos to predict whether someone was homosexual or not, right? And the methodology appeared solid. They had about 35,000 images of about 15,000 individuals, and it had a balanced representation of both sexual and gender. So, at least from my technical perspective, that could be done. That makes sense. And the accuracy they reported was 81% for men and 74% for women. And we already saw 2 cases, and I'd like to ask you guys what went wrong here. I won't try to answer the questions for this one, and I lay them to you, and maybe you can ask that in the end in the questions. But I'd like to ask you these 3 questions again. Who benefits from this kind of technology? Who could be harmed? And which groups might be disproportionately affected? Now let's move on to the ACL, to the actual papers from the ACL. For the past few months, we've been building a dataset compiling all ethical consideration sections in ACL papers from 2021. We scrapped thousands of papers, not only from ACL, but from other conferences in the ACL, and converted each paper into a structured format, right? So we structured it into each section. We have the abstract, we have all the authors, we have all the affiliations, and in particular, we also extracted all ethical consideration sections. And we will release this resource to the community. We have all papers from 2021 till today, and we are writing a paper exploring these same 3 questions. And the 3 questions there are what percentage of papers include an ethics statement? Do those statements address fundamental ethical questions? And are there national differences in how ethics sections are written? For the first 2, we already have some answers, and I will give you here. So we found that over the past 4 years, the proportion of papers with ethics sections has increased. So in 2021, that was about 15%. In 2022, that doubled to 30%. And in the past few years, we are leveling off with about 50%. So about half have an ethical section. We're not talking about its content, it's just binary, if it has one or if it doesn't have one. This trend is not only to the ACL, but we have data from EACL, EMNLP, NACL, right? And this 50% seems to be at the point we are now in all of these chapters. So one of the main tasks of our paper is we want to evaluate whether these ethical sections about their actual content, if they answered these 3 fundamental questions that we talked about before. So who benefits if the technology works as intended, who might be harmed, either if it fails or if it works as intended, and are possible harms likely to fall disproportionately on populations that already experience some marginalization, right? For each ethical section, we ask an LLM to determine if these questions were answered, binary, right? So it should extract evidence because the question was quite simple. If it had an answer to this or it didn't, right? And this is the same graph as before. So although more papers now include ethics sections, only a small subset address these questions. So you can see that about half have an ethics section, but here are the ones that actually mention the who benefits from the technology and from the research itself, right? We can I made this graph with a gray bar, right? Because to show that it's a percentage of a percentage that focus on this fundamental question, right? So if you grab all the papers as a whole, less than 20% of all papers address who benefits from the technology and from the research of the paper. Here we can see similar numbers for who gets harmed or who might get harmed by this technology. So again, even less, maybe for ACL 2024, it's about 15% or less, maybe closer to 10. And the last one, it's the worst one, and the most underrepresented concern is the impact on vulnerable populations. We can see that it's about, I don't know, 3%, I think 5% of the ones that have an ethics section. So as a whole, it's almost zero. To close this talk, I'd like to leave you with a few questions, right? And we have a few minutes later for questions. These conclusions may be, are we only discussing superficial aspects on our ethical sections? Are we focusing too much on checklists? Do we think that checklists are good enough and we don't focus on these fundamental questions? Shouldn't we tackle them in our ethical sections? I think we should, but maybe you disagree. And the last part that is actually related to some aspects of Karen's talk is about power shifting, right? LLMs are shifting power around in our society. They are being used more and more in concerning aspects, in concerning tasks, and failing to consider who is harmed affects everyone, especially vulnerable groups, right? They are already marginalized, and if they are not considered when doing new research, they will feel it the most. Thank you.
So Guido has called for your questions. I've been reminded by Guido, if you come up to the mic because they don't know and they cannot see us, to please introduce yourself with your name and affiliation. Okay, we have one person coming. Yes, great. So please queue up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the nice talk. Hi, I'm Moritz from Heidelberg University. I was wondering whether the benefits and potential harms, I feel they mostly come from applying the technologies rather than having the technology. Like, let's say I'm a genius and I develop LoRa. That's not really a direct impact on anyone if it's not being used. So I was wondering whether you think that for the papers that we write, whether it makes sense for all of them to include the questions, and if yes, what should a technical paper without any direct application write as potential people that should benefit or could benefit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think both the existence and the application of any technologies should be considered by the authors. I think one of the main aspects is not only the actual writing portion of the ethical section, but the debating in the internal team. We dealt with that in our projects. We usually have some heated debates in what we do, and I think that's very, very healthy. I think the first of all, we should think about whether the actual research process makes sense and if it's ethical. And of course, as you say, what people might do, an actual not thinking in the best case scenario, thinking about what adversary people might do without technology. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for some additional questions. If you have a question online from those presenters, people online, we'll take it right after this question here in the audience. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Miles. I'm a student at the University of Richmond, and I want to ask, whenever you're scraping the papers, those were the papers published at ACL and related conferences, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that because the ethics sections, when included, woefully didn't answer some of the actual topics that you would want to consider in ethics, that the requirements for these sections should be maybe stronger inside of like rolling review?
Yeah, I mean, we have the ethics committee here. I mean, this is an ongoing process. Each year, the guidelines change. So, for instance, this year, it was focused mostly on checklists. I don't know if you sent a paper into AMNLP or ACL, you have to fill out a more specific checklist, and people might think that this is enough, right? Because they check, did we pay for people that created data? Did we do this? Did we do that? And authors may think that's good enough. So I agree that maybe clarifying what clarifying these guiding questions in the guidelines could be useful. I also think these are not exhaustive, right? These are only 3 fundamental questions. I think they're fundamental, but I think they're definitely only 3. So I think that they should all be included because I think they are very clear. I think the who benefits, who gets harmed, and if it falls under marginalized population is definitely something I would include. But adding more questions, adding more fundamental questions in the guidelines could also be useful.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Luciana, are there any questions online from other participants?
We had one question from Dong Han asking about AACL, and we have that data, and we just didn't report that in the slides, but we ran the experiment for AACL and also other smaller and conferences in the anthology. Okay,
excellent. So we're right on time. So we have a third presentation now by myself, but actually Adriana is doing the responsibilities, just to be the figurehead. Yeah. So Boma, we'll need your help to reload the slides and then go from the section next.
Okay.